All right, well, welcome back. So, in this podcast, we're going to talk about the science of motivation. We're going to talk about emotional mastery and understanding how to build sustainable athletes. But more importantly, we're going to ask the question, why do some players thrive under pressure? Why do some players just crumble? And why do some bounce back from failure while others spiral down? And we're also going to dig into the strategies of how to increase motivation, how to manage emotions, and how to become a self-reliant hockey player. And we're going to talk about how to actually sustain motivation. We're going to talk about how to discover, okay, how do emotions really work? How do we handle them? And then how do we make them work for you? And then again, we'll talk about the principles of self-coaching, why it's important to be independent, and how that's going to help you develop as a player. So we'll break those down, and that's the plan for today. And if you like this style of the podcast that we're now doing, let me know, and it'll help me to understand if I want to continue with this style, maybe I switch it up. But at the end of the day, I'm always growing. I'm always trying to evolve with this. So just keep me in the loop in terms of what you guys prefer. Let me know what you like. So just to get started, the main piece when it comes to motivation and dopamine is understanding that dopamine is really the brain's fuel. It's also, as Andrew Huberman or Dr. Huberman talks about, it's the currency of all of our brains. It's really what we're all trading on. When we have something good happen to us, whenever we have basically a good feeling, we score a goal, we win a game, we win a championship, in pretty much the core sense of it, dopamine is the thing that's driving that. And dopamine is it's not about the reward, it's actually about the anticipation of the reward. This is why people often feel more excited before a game than after the game. It's why you often feel so good going into, I'm about to have this good thing happen. I'm about to go on this trip. I'm about to have a great season. I'm about to have a good game. But it's really that dopamine, dopamine's really the hope system. It fuels the belief that something good is about to happen. Or as Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about, it's not the having, like dopamine's not really about having, it's about wanting. So for example, players overhype a game and they have high dopamine or anticipation, and then they experience emotional kind of crashes when the outcome doesn't meet their expectations. And that can be really frustrating. It can be really tough to handle because this is kind of the dopamine cycle we run into. And so basically the dopamine cycle that we run into is that we have the anticipation of the craving before something happens. And then this can be like the excitement before you're about to score on a breakaway. And then you have the reward prediction error. Now, this is a really important concept. So basically, we can have something where it's positive or negative. And so we have the positive. So when results exceed our expectations, then basically what happens is that a dopamine spike occurs. And when things don't exceed or when they fall short, dopamine drops below baseline. And so a good example of this is someone says, hey, you're going to go get ice cream. And you feel excited. You're like, yeah, okay, awesome. You're excited to go do the thing. Then if someone says, okay, you're actually not going to get ice cream. You're actually going to end up having to do, I don't know, something you don't want to do. Could be go and travel and do some work for school or something. So now you have the expectation of something good. Then you end up actually having something much worse. That is really a negative. So that's when we have the dopamine drop. Now, the other way around this, or the other example, the opposite of this, is someone says, okay, we're going to go to get ice cream. And then instead you end up going and saying, we're going to go to an NHL game. And you're like, whew, okay, like dopamine spikes off the chart. So the key here is when people talk about the idea of not getting too high or not getting too low, this is really what we want to focus on as a player, is being careful not to get caught up in, I have such high expectations. Today's going to go super well. We're going to crush this team 10-0. Because then if you don't, dopamine dips and now it's just a disappointment after the game. Or we set them super or really, if we set super low expectations, we kind of get this benefit, right? Because then everything is a positive. Then everything is an opportunity to build off of. But fundamentally, what you want to do is shift your attention to the process, to the things you can control, not just the outcomes. And this stabilizes this dopamine circuit, right? Or cycle. Because then you don't have this massive up and massive down. It's kind of this more stable, being able to control and feel good. And there's nothing wrong with having some anticipation. Here's the thing. Failure impacts dopamine because when we fail, failure leads to basically saying our dopamine level drops below baseline, right? Because the expectations aren't met. So if you set an expectation, then that doesn't happen. The dopamine drops. And if you think about this from a evolutionary perspective, if you anticipate something and it doesn't manifest or it doesn't happen, it's like the death of that internal hope system. It starts to kill that system off. And so this happens to so many players. For example, I'm working with a few players right now that they had the goal of playing at a higher level. They wanted to play at the NCAA level, and they set that goal. They were working super hard towards it, and then they had injuries and things get in the way. And so they had this high hope and high expectation, and now they get injured, and it starts to feel like that's slipping away. It starts to feel like, man, I'm not on the right team now. I'm not getting the ice time. I'm not getting to play. And your dopamine levels drop, and it starts to crush you because the hope system is not getting rewarded. So now the dopamine fires, you don't get what you want, and dopamine keeps dropping below baseline, which says, hey, maybe we should stop giving energy. Maybe we should stop wiring this part of the system to hope for this thing because it appears that that's not coming. And so what you have to do as a player to fight this is use 3 core tools, or at least these are the 3 core tools I recommend to any players that I work with. So the first one is setting micro goals. So micro goals means you celebrate small victories to create consistent dopamine reinforcement. So what this means is that even if you're not hitting these big goals that you want to hit at the end of the year, you're setting small goals throughout the week in smaller term that give you these little wins that increase that dopamine, which then allows you to get reinforced to keep that hope cycle going. So it's good to have a long-term goal, but then it's good to have shorter-term micro goals, and then it's good to have a process that you really focus on to get you to those micro goals. That's what keeps you present, by focusing on the implementation intentions. That's what we talked about last week. If you didn't watch that video or listen to that podcast, go back and listen to that one on setting intention. But that's the key, is that when we have a process-focused intention, then it allows us to keep getting dopamine because we can be enjoying what we're currently doing and getting that kind of drive towards focus on the next thing, and get that spike. And you can also hit these smaller goals so you feel like you're winning. And what's interesting is they've actually shown, this was a crazy study they did, which I can't find it. I've struggled to find it again. But basically what they did is they had 2 sets of high-level sprinters, and they had them do sprints in training, and they would time their sprints. And I think it was like at the end of a week or something like that, they would measure it. And what happened is that one of the groups was actually running a shorter distance, so their times were shorter. So that's a good thing. And what's really interesting is that the people that they told were running shorter times felt like they were winning because they were running faster. And what's interesting is they actually ended up being more successful. They actually ended up getting faster. They developed faster. They felt like they were winning, which I think connects to the dopamine of, if you feel like you're succeeding, it reinforces that cycle. So maybe you eat a little better, maybe you sleep a little better, or maybe you heal and recover a little better. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the mechanism is behind it, but all I know is that if that's the case and feeling like you're winning is beneficial, then the logic is set smaller goals so that you feel like you're winning all the time. And yes, it's not about never losing. It's not about you don't face challenges. It's about setting clear intentions of, here's the process I'm going to focus on. Here's the small goals I'm working towards with that process. You hit those small goals. You feel like you're winning, which then drives you and reinforces that hope cycle. And then you become more driven to do the thing. And so if you think about this for a young player, players who are naturally good when they're younger, or players who are just good at any age or at any level, this is that feeling you get when your team wins, or you win championships, or you're getting lots of points. And if you think of the opposite, if you're not gifted or you're not playing at the level where you have a chance to dominate, if you've never had that before, well, then it's really hard to create that cycle, right? It's very difficult to create that cycle as a player, because if you're never having those wins, you're never focusing on the process, it's really difficult to do any of that stuff. And so my recommendation for you is to start to think about how to set up micro wins in your life. Now, the next piece to this, and you can create wins and you can create mental momentum. And I talk about this before games with a lot of my players. There's a system I talk about, which is entering the game already winning. And this is a system where you actually visualize yourself having already had a good first period going into the first period. Then when you do that, the benefit is that you now feel like you're already rolling, you've already succeeded. We know this works because if you have a good period, you almost always feel good and confident going into the next. So why not use visualization and create that mental momentum and roll into the next situation, which I believe also reinforces and creates that cycle of dopamine where you create that hope of, okay, I'm going to score in the future because I know I've seen it and I've reinforced that cycle. And the cool thing when it comes to visualization is that, as Dr. Huberman and Jordan Peterson, or Dr. Peterson, talked about, was this concept that the closer the behavior is to the reward, the more likely it's reinforced, which means the more likely it's rewired into your brain, and the more likely it is that you do that action again. So if you use visualization to wire something you want to have happen, and you wire it so that you see the puck go in, you feel really good about it, and you see what you did, right? So it's a situation, you do something in the visualization, you get an outcome. Now what you've done is you've reinforced that cycle. So through visualization, it's my belief that you are wiring those circuits and encouraging yourself to do that thing more often, which then creates a better self-image, which then, again, this dopamine cycle continues. And the third skill, or the third tool I recommend you use in order to maximize dopamine in this sense. Now, there's a lot of other tactics you can use, like sunlight and other things, which I've had previous podcasts on, and I will talk about more in the future. But the key thing is intention setting. And again, we talked about it last time, but the point of intention setting is saying, instead of going in and saying, I'm going to score 5 goals today, and creating this like really weird random goal, instead what you can do, which is super beneficial, is focusing on the processes you can control. So being able to say, okay, I'm going to focus on possession on the zone entry. I'm going to focus on staying in position in the D zone. I'm going to focus on driving the net any opportunity when I get the puck, right? And then you set these more intentional things, and that drives you to be more focused on opportunities and sets your reticular activating system to look for those things. And then again, you can start to do it more, you get reinforced, you're winning, you're feeling good, and it creates that momentum. So the next key thing I want to talk about is mastering your emotions. And this has been a topic I've been working on with a lot of my guys throughout the many years that I've been working with players. And one of the key principles and concepts I want to cover today is the concept of signals, not barriers. And so what I mean by this is negative emotions are typically a feedback mechanism more than they are a flaw or a problem to be solved per se. And so what I mean is that emotions are not inherently good or bad. They're signals. And you need to learn to distinguish between useful signals, right, indicating change is needed, and faulty programming, so negative loops unrelated to actions. So it's being able to distinguish between, is this thing a signal from basically my subconscious mind that something needs to change? Or maybe it could just be a flaw in the system. It could be a negative loop. It could be a negative program that is in your mind that you need to learn from. So the key thing to think about is, if you feel negative emotions because you're acting poorly, that's your brain telling you to change. So if you're not acting in alignment with the person and player you want to be, maybe you should step back and ask yourself, well, is this emotion connected to the fact that I'm not acting the way I need to act? If that's the case, then you should take that feedback and use it to adjust accordingly. It's a very important nuance and very important distinction to make for yourself. So really, sometimes you don't need to fix the emotion and remove the emotion and unwire it. You need to fix the actions you're taking, because it's a signal that you need to take different actions. Now, one really interesting concept, which is not a positive one per se, but the concept of trauma is deeply connected to this. Now, I'm not going to get into like super deep, childhood trauma and things like that, but one concept to think about is what trauma really is it creates a deep, lasting emotional program. So when something bad happens to you, or something happens that your brain perceives as dangerous, there's a deep, long-lasting emotional program in response and typically belief pattern that forms around that. In some cases, a negative event, like something that would be a traumatic event, can be considered a learning event. It's something that you learn a positive thing from, and you act differently because of it. But a lot of times, something bad happens to us, like for example in hockey, we get blown up by a hit, and then we perceive that every time we get in a situation where we got hit last time, we have to throw the puck away, make a safe play. That is when you're using essentially like a trauma to inform a negative behavior, or a behavior that is built on false belief. You're going to get blown up every time you do this thing. But sometimes, if you do get blown up in a situation, it might teach you a lesson you need to learn. And so that technically trauma was a good thing in that case, because you now learn from that and don't do that again. So fundamentally, it's all learning. But the key is realizing that, did you learn the right lesson from the event, or have you learned the wrong lesson, developed a incorrect belief, which leads to you taking an ineffective action? So again, a perfect example, I'll just circle back to that concept of getting hit. A player could develop a fear of injury after a bad hit, which creates a negative loop, but also learns to positionally put themselves in a safer place when they do get hit, which is a positive adaptation. Now, here's the thing. If you're bumping up against this where you're creating negative responses and you're not responding the way you want, then what I would recommend you do is you start to develop some tools to get better at handling these emotions and start to rewire or relearn how you want to respond. There's a lot of different tactics. This is a super deep conversation, but just to keep it simple, and some of the things I've been talking about recently and thinking about recently and researching recently is the concept of using breath techniques to calm the system down. And this is something you'll hear from like any mental coach, so I know, I get it, you've heard it before. But just doing something simple like taking 5 deep breaths with a 4, 7, 8 pattern. So 4 seconds in, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale. Basically, this does is it helps to calm your nervous system down. And if you can't control your emotions, you can still control your physiological state typically, which then calms your mind. So breathing helps calm your physiological state. It helps calm your body down, which then can lead to essentially like bottom-up relaxation, as opposed to doing top-down relaxation, which would be more like psychologically you calm your system down, you relax the emotions more so, and that leads to everything else calming down, right? That's not fully accurate to what bottom-up and top-down actually mean, but just conceptually, it's kind of a cool way to think about it. Do I calm my body down with breathing, which then leads to my mind calming down? Or do I calm my thinking and my thoughts down, which then calms the body down? A lot of times it's kind of doing both at the same time. It's a helpful framework to use. The next kind of tool or tactic I'd recommend here is using self-talk. So you can use self-talk to essentially say, okay, if you say, I suck, well, that's not a very helpful way to respond to anything, because you're essentially just turning that into an identity trait for yourself. If you miss the net on a shot, you say, I suck, well, that doesn't help anything. But if you say, I missed, okay, what can I do to fix it? Or, okay, next one, right? If you see the best shooters, they don't, like Alex Ovechkin, you see him miss the net, he's like, okay, next one. Like you can tell that that's his thought process. So you want to develop that type of thought process. And if you do, you become the type of person who is essentially coaching themselves with self-talk, and you're programming your subconscious mind to do what you want it to do. And then the third piece to emotional reprogramming, or just being able to more so master your emotions or get better at it, is being able to reframe a situation. Now, this is more of a thing that you do when you have a little bit of space, so like between periods or sometimes between shifts. It's not something you're going to do like in the shift, obviously. But what you can do is, this is more top down, like from your brain and your thinking, and then calms your system down, is you can use cognitive reframing. And what this basically means is being able to see setbacks as opportunities, for example, or being able to see getting a hard hit done against you is something that fuels you and gives you energy and excites you and makes you go and make bigger hits or go make a play or go score a goal. The key is understanding that all of this stuff is being able to reframe things. It's being able to change the story you're telling yourself. And so I talk a lot about this with all my guys. The story you are currently telling yourself about your hockey career is the story you essentially are living into. And this is the same concept as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say something's going to go bad and you continue to say that over and over and over and over again, and you then act in alignment with what you're saying, this game's going to suck, we're going to get beat, and then you go into the game and you're constantly just throwing pucks away and doing all the things that should lead to the outcome you said was going to happen, well, then you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, for example, if you miss a shot, being able to say, okay, that was a chance to learn what did I mess up on, or did I get better because now I understand how to shoot in that situation, or do I now know how to handle pressure because it was a big opportunity in that game. I know for me, having went through some times where I missed really big opportunities in overtime and some situations, even though it seems like a bad thing, if you change the story from I just lost us the game to now I know how to handle that situation in the future, or now I'm more comfortable there, right? Now it takes something that could be like traumatic and you reframe your beliefs around it. So that's what cognitive reframing does, is it's just changing the story you're telling yourself about the situation, which a lot of times can make you feel good about the situation, which is kind of crazy. And the last piece I want to get into is building self-reliance, or becoming a self-sustaining athlete, somebody who's able to coach themselves, somebody who's able to really, they're not reliant on anybody, they're independent, and they're able to work with coaches, work with teammates, but they don't need other people to succeed. I think this is such an important component of being a great athlete, because if you really want to be the best athlete you can be, you have to develop the skill of being able to coach yourself. Why? Well, 90% of what you do as a player is done without any coach really telling you what to do. And also, really what's happening when we are thinking is we're telling ourselves what to do. We're coaching ourselves. So great athletes eventually learn to coach themselves. Your goal as a mentor, or at least my goal as a mentor, and I think as a parent, as any coach, your goal should be to make yourself obsolete by empowering yourself, empowering other players, right? Not empowering yourself, but empowering players to do what you want them to do, and being able to have them be self-motivated, be self-driven, and be able to coach themselves. At some point, and this is for players, at some point, you have to hold yourself accountable. That's what separates the good players from the great players. That's what separates the best people in any field, is they're able to coach themselves. They're able to take a step forward and do what they know they need to do without having anybody hold their hand. And as a young player, if you're a junior player listening to this, this is what you have to do. You have to learn how to stop doing things where you need people to hold your hand. If you need someone to hold your hand as a junior player, you're not going to succeed, because you're not going to be doing the stuff you need to do consistently, because no one's going to want it as bad as you do. No one's as worried about your career as you are. And if they are, well, then you have a problem. Like internally, there's a problem. And the best players, they know how to course correct. They don't have to wait for a coach. If they have a bad shift, they know what they need to do. And if a coach tells them something, they listen to see, okay, is there anything else I can learn from what they're saying? They don't need that extra feedback because they've already done it. The extra feedback is just a bonus. You need to be able to step up and course correct yourself between shifts, between periods, between games. That's all you are doing, is coaching yourself. And so this is where the cybernetic model comes in. And it's really a cybernetic feedback loop. So the concept is that you have a conscious mind, or the talker in your head, which in the inner game of tennis he calls it self-one. And this acts as a coach for the conscious mind, or this acts as a coach for the subconscious mind, or self-two, as he calls it. The subconscious mind then tells the body what to do. The body carries out the action. And so the conscious mind, or the internal coach that you have, the self-talker, it is telling and programming the subconscious mind. It's setting the goals and telling the subconscious mind, hey, I want you to carry this out. I want you to accomplish this. And what it's really doing is it's programming the image, the self-image you have of yourself. That self-image and the targets you set are then carried out by the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind tells the body what to do. The body goes and carries it out. And then you get feedback. And then the conscious mind can take that feedback and then coach the subconscious mind again. The key here is that self-one, or the subconscious mind, self-one, or the conscious mind, must trust self-two, the subconscious mind, to perform. Just as a coach has to learn how to trust their players because the coach is not on the ice. Your ego, the voice in your head, that inner coach, is not playing on the ice with you. They are not. They are the voice in your head that talks after. And if that voice tries to come into the game, it is going to interfere. It's going to be in the wrong step in the process. You have the coach. The coach says what the player should do on the ice. The player then does it, carries out the action, right? That's the subconscious mind talking to the body. It happens, and then the coach gets that feedback and then coaches the subconscious mind again. Right? That's what's happening. That's the key. And so a cybernetic mechanism is really a system that regulates to achieve a goal. And that's what makes great players great, is that because they understand how to coach themselves effectively, they are able to reprogram their mind to have the right goals in mind so that the cyber mechanism can carry them to that goal. They have the right target set. And there's a whole process that I teach in our more advanced program. So if you're interested in that stuff, you can check below. There's links and you can apply to see if we can help you. But this is why I encourage players to identify and pay attention consciously to what it is you want to be as a player, how you want to think, how you want to feel, how you want to act, and then intentionally practice that, because that's the stuff that programs your subconscious mind, that when you get into flow state, you naturally go into that. You naturally do that because that's what you've told the subconscious mind, I want you to do. That's what you've programmed as the image or the target that it's moving towards. So I encourage you to do that. And then when you get into games, you trust your training. You trust the software. You let it run, and you see what happens, and you take that feedback, and then you reprogram the subconscious mind again, and then you go and see what happens again. And the best players are the best at understanding this loop. And so the key here as a player, if you're trying to become a more self-sustaining player, someone who's independent, you need to optimize your training system. So this means teach yourself, okay, how do I set up schedules? How do I track my progress? How do I adjust without waiting for external inputs? How do I not need a coach to come in? For example, do you use a journaling system? Do you log what you did that day? Do you have clear notes of what lessons you learned so you can not make those mistakes again? Do you have a self-reflection process? Do you journal? Do you meditate? These are all things that we have in a system with all of our programs, but if you don't have a system in place, that's something you should start to put in. Again, if you want to apply to learn how to do this stuff, feel free to reach out. There's links where you can just fill out a form, apply, and we'll get back to you. But ultimately, these abilities, if you develop them, you become a more self-sustaining athlete. And somebody who is self-sustaining can get better all the time. They don't need anybody to carry them. And I want that for you. So if you're not doing that right now, start to plan your schedule, track your progress, make clear adjustments, and then use the external feedback as a bonus, not as the thing you rely on to improve. And then develop the right kind of processes and iterations to help you with that system. Just figure out if it's a journaling system, if it's meditating, if it's going for walks, whatever it is, it's going to help you to process that information. And so here's the practical tools you can take away. So for players, you can start to use visualization as a key tool. You can start to set core micro goals. You can start to set intentions going into practices. For coaches, my recommendation is you get better at actually offering feedback to players, and you help players to learn the skill set of being self-sustaining so that when you give them feedback, they've already implemented some of this, and then you're just helping put rocket boosters on their development. I think one key thing, which I'm going to talk about next week in much more detail, is how to give feedback effectively. And this comes from not me just making it up, but noticing what works. And then also comes from the psychological literature of how to give feedback to anybody in general, which is connected to, hey, I noticed you do this thing well. So you say something essentially positive to reinforce their self-image. And then you identify, hey, this is what you could have done better. This is what I'd like to see next time, right? And that can really help. And so we'll go way more in depth. So make sure you're subscribed so you can actually see that stuff when it does drop next week, because I'll talk about that in a lot more depth. And then for parents, I encourage you to teach your son or daughter the concepts of maturity. So being responsible, being able to control their emotions, being able to be a long-term thinker, being able to organize their life. Because really maturity is understanding how to steer your own ship. Even when the tough waters hit or rough waters hit, you understand the skill of here's how I navigate. And if a player doesn't have those tools, then they're going to struggle. And that's why I do what I do, is to help players to build that tool set, to understand how to navigate whatever waters come up. And then my goal is to make myself obsolete. And yes, I do have longer term programs where you can get more support. You can get kind of help you with sharpening the tools as opposed to giving you new tools all the time, helping you get reminders, helping to check in and see maybe, hey, maybe you need to try a different tool there. I want players to have that support and not feel like they're lost, not feel like they have no idea what to do in this situation. And it's something you can learn. It's something any player can learn. It's something I hope that if for all the players listening, you do start to take a step into, check out my free school group, start to do that free training. We're creating a whole fully updated system there. So there's a ton of value in that. And just in conclusion, you want to become the type of person who looks for challenges. You want to be the type of person who understands how to learn from challenges and difficulties and failures. Because at the end of the day, there really is no true failure and end point to anything until you die. That's the end. And so until that day comes, you have an opportunity to continue to develop and learn from anything that happens to you. And so developing the self-sustaining ability is so key. So become more independent as a player, start to develop these tools that I talked about, and check out the other tools we have. Again, if you want to apply to work with us, let me know. You can apply and we'll see if you're a good fit, if you even qualify to work with us, and we will go from there. Some additional resources you can look at. There's a book called Dopamine Nation by Dr. Ann Lemke, I think is how you say it. You can read The Inner Game of Tennis by W. Timothy Galloway. Unreal book. I have read that. I have not read Dopamine Nation. Some videos and some podcasts to look at. Huberman Lab on motivation. You can look at Jocko Willink on discipline. And then there's some studies which I have written down, which I'm not going to tell you to read right now. But there are some cool ones. Actually, I'll give you this one. Predicting Ward Signal of Dopamine Neurons from the Journal of Neurophysiology. Cool one you can look at. But either way, if you have questions, let me know. If you guys enjoy this format, let me know. I hope you have an absolutely awesome week. I hope you enjoyed this one, and go crush it. And I hope you enjoyed your Zone 2 or your bus ride or your car ride or your walk or your stick handling or shooting session or whatever you did while you listen to this, because I'm assuming you do something while you listen. So hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.